Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, as Patricia has just said. Welcome to the session. My name is Dan Frost, and I'm with C Prime. Today, we will be exploring how to customize, automate, and expand Jira by using the app PowerScripts for Jira. With me today, I have Ethan Folks, the Supply Chain Director from Gellert Global Group. He's based in New Jersey, and has been working with these tools for about 2 years. I also have Justin Evans, the Product Owner Director from C Prime, and a rare jack-of-all-trades, master of many. So before we get started, we want to do a quick poll. If you would, Patricia. So we want to sample or survey what your level of proficiency with PowerScripts is today. We have options 1 through 5. Go ahead and click the radio button, select Submit, and we'll take a look here. Fantastic. It looks like we have a lot of folks who have not or are not very proficient with PowerScripts. So this will be a great learning opportunity to explore, again, how to really extend Jira. We've got one more question for you right now, and that is, what best describes your role within your company? All right, thank you so much. Excellent. This really helps us kind of adjust how we will present for the day, knowing who we have on the line. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Justin Evans to take us through some of the essentials.
So yeah, the agenda for today, introductions, which Dan just kindly gave. I will be talking about PowerScripts for Jira as the add-on itself, what it does, where it plays, what kind of use cases there are for this add-on, what you can do with it. Then I'll be handing it off to Ethan from Gellert Global Group, who's going to talk about 2 specific use cases that they utilize PowerScripts for to transform how they use Jira and really transform how they run their business. And then we'll wrap it up with some Q&A, because I'm sure there will be plenty of questions after we get through all this glorious content. So jumping right in, not knowing your proficiency with Jira, we have a pretty large audience. Some people might not be familiar with Atlassian. Atlassian is an enterprise software company, and their tagline is to say that their software helps unleash the potential in every team. They have a whole stack of applications down 3 primary tracks: planning and tracking. Jira obviously is the big one. Coding, building, and shipping. Bitbucket and Bamboo play there, and collaboration. HipChat, Confluence, and the recent acquisition of Trello. So they have a full suite of solutions that cover everything from project management to software deployment. In addition to their applications, they also have a marketplace. So the applications that they develop, for example, Jira, has a base level of functionality, but they've opened it up to make it so that third-party vendors can build applications that augment the power and the functional areas and the features of the base software. And to date, they have nearly 3,000 applications across their suite of applications. Jira, Confluence, Bitbucket, Bamboo, you name it, there's an add-on to that. So in our synopsis for this webinar, we said we'd give you a little bit of a knowledge share about what you need to consider when you're thinking about evaluating and purchasing add-ons. There's a lot to consider. These bullets might seem obvious, but in my working with many organizations as a Jira administrator over many years, they tend not to be obvious. And if they are obvious, they're not necessarily followed. So we put together this list of best practices to perform when you're evaluating and purchasing an add-on in the Atlassian marketplace. Number one is you have to understand your application's deployment environment. Not all add-ons are compatible with all deployment environments. Atlassian, for many of their applications, has a cloud offering, a on-premise server offering, and a data center offering. And not all add-ons are compatible with all deployments. So understand your deployment environment and what's compatible with your deployment environment. Before starting an evaluation, have a test plan ready. You may only have 30, 60, 90 days for an evaluation license for an add-on, and you really want to understand what you're trying to get out of it, that it satisfies your business needs, your use cases, and there may be several other add-ons in the marketplace that do very similar things with very similar feature sets, and you want to put those two together and beat them together to understand which one wins, which one satisfies most of your business needs. So that covers number 3 as well. Number 4, keep the number of add-ons in production to a minimum. A lot of times you'll find that there are a number of single-purpose add-ons that from different vendors. You'll see, I think Ethan mentioned that he had 40 add-ons in his production environment for Jira. And while not necessarily a problem on its face, we'll get into some more best practices about compatibility, but also there's the potential for add-ons to collide with each other. And also, when you're experiencing potential problems in your base Jira, the first thing that support always tells you to do is to disable add-ons to see if it's causing the problem. So add-ons can potentially cause problems with base Jira or your base Atlassian application, but they can sometimes also cause problems with other add-ons. So it's always good to keep the number of add-ons to a minimum. Number 5 is a corollary to 4. Avoid single-purpose add-ons. Like I mentioned, this is kind of a housekeeping bullet. Prefer add-ons from Atlassian verified vendors. To become an Atlassian verified vendor, you have to go through a pretty stringent process of demonstrating that you have specific SLAs, service level agreements, that you have a support line, that you're responsive to bug reports and feature requests and things of that nature. So you always want to check that Atlassian verified badge. You also want to prefer add-ons that have a history of releasing compatibility updates quickly. This is very important. If you have many add-ons in your production instance, you'll find that when you want to upgrade your Jira, for example, to the next major release, all of your add-ons have to be marked as compatible with that next major release. And you can't, if one of those add-ons is business critical and is not compatible with a major upgrade, and you want to upgrade, that can slow that whole upgrade train down to a screeching halt. So you want to check the version history of add-ons to make sure that they release compatibility versions quickly after Atlassian deploys a new version of their product. And number 8, read the reviews. Social proof is a very powerful thing. It can be positive, it can be negative, and don't just take reviews on their face for the initial install. Whenever an add-on vendor releases a new major version of their product, read the reviews then too, because oftentimes it can be buggy on the first initial release of a major upgrade. So you might want to hold off on upgrading your add-on if the reviews are coming in saying that it's causing some problems. So talking about PowerScripts for Jira, this is what the reason for the season is. It's an add-on in the Atlassian marketplace. It's got 4 bullets there that say some of what our feature sets are. The last one, I think, provides far more functionality than any other scripting plugin on the market. We'll try and prove that case with the subsequent slides. So where does PowerScripts for Jira land in the Atlassian ecosystem? It's in the plan and track swim lane. It's compatible with Jira Core, Jira Software, and Jira Service Desk. It's compatible with Deployment Options Server and Data Center. It is not currently compatible with cloud. So to utilize PowerScripts for Jira, you have to have a server or a data center deployment. And these green bubbles here show all the different add-on categories that PowerScripts for Jira plays in. I think Atlassian has 21 categories, and I think I'm being I may be shortchanging the add-on, saying it only falls within 8 buckets, but maps to a lot of different areas within Jira. So why do teams choose PowerScripts? Ease of use. Scripting is fast and the barrier to entry is low. You'll see that the simple issue language is really easy to write a pseudocode. We'll see that in subsequent slides. Tremendous value, because PowerScripts is a holistic solution. It has the ability to replace the functionality of many single-purpose add-ons, and at a lower cost, may start stacking up the cost of all your single-purpose add-ons. And necessity, as Jira adoption grows and scales throughout the enterprise, you're going to want to do things like automate workflow transitions, fire off scripts when X happens, I want Y to happen as well. It integrates with remote databases, remote systems and applications, and a lot of times your enterprise data is in another application, and you want Jira to be able to get at it. So PowerScripts helps there. Trigger anywhere. The idea with PowerScripts is that you write a script once, and anything that happens within Jira can invoke a script to run. You can do it real time via dashboard gadget, system or user-defined events, say issue created, issue updated, version created, those types of things. Interval and cron, you can do some governance scripting on set intervals or set times of the day, week, month. Workflow transitions, email handling even, create and edit screens, and so on and so forth. The API is very powerful, and we have a JQL search option now with PowerScripts 4.0. As I mentioned a few slides ago, ease of use is one of the main features for PowerScripts. The simple issue language is purpose-built for Jira, and it's easy to write a pseudocode. Here's a couple examples. The code to the right is a clone and link. 3 lines of code replaces a rather expensive add-on. And the one to the underneath is resolve all open subtasks of an issue. So that's another common use case where if you close the parent task, you want to close all your subtasks, you can do that in a handful of lines of code. Compare this with, say, Java or Groovy. These 3 lines of code might be 30 to 40 lines of code in other programming languages. Easily integrate with remote systems, another major feature of PowerScripts. You can write SQL statements, you can connect to remote database management systems, you can connect to REST APIs, you can post information to an external API, you can get information from an external API, you can set up PowerScripts to receive information to run a script based on various arguments and parameters. You can also connect to LDAP. We have that native. You can connect to ERPs, CRMs, basically any application that has an API or a database, you can get that information in and out. It also connects to automates other instances of Jira. If you have PowerScripts installed on both instances of Jira, you can do some pretty stellar things with synchronization. Again, as I mentioned before, it replaces multiple add-ons. Here's a selected subset of some add-ons where we believe we cover at least 90% functionality. And you see if you have only single-purpose add-ons, which seem like the right thing to do when you first install them and evaluate them, you start stacking the price up on top of each other, and PowerScripts for Jira does all of these things at a lower cost, and you start stacking them all up together. Selected use cases. These are 3 main use cases that we see that our users get out of PowerScripts. If it's the net automation functionality, as I mentioned, if you can, there are many triggering mechanisms within Jira, and on any of those triggering mechanisms, you can run a script that can be very powerful. Easily integrate with remote systems and have your remote systems integrate with Jira. As I just mentioned in the previous slide, you can integrate with remote databases, APIs, other Jira instances, and any application that has an API or a database. And you can replace many single-purpose add-ons with a larger, more comprehensive solution at a cheaper price point when you put it all together. The main point I want to make today is that this Jira adoption scales throughout the enterprise. Addressing these needs becomes more and more critical. We like to say that PowerScript should be installed at every application, every Jira instance out there, because every organization, as they grow, will need something like this, and it just makes sense to have a solution that's a framework of automation and integration. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ethan to talk about how Geller Global Group has used PowerScripts for 2 very specific use cases.
Awesome. Thanks, Justin. Let's see, show my screen. 3. Awesome. You guys can see my screen?
Looks good, Ethan.
Perfect. All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Ethan, and I am the Director of IT and also Director of Supply Chain for GGG, which stands for Geller Global Group. We are about a little over $1 billion group of food importing companies. I'm going to run through Jira for Business, and the point I want to drive home is how I view Jira, which is pretty much as the Swiss Army knife. So Jira can do anything and everything, which is extremely powerful. And I want to kind of show you how that plays out in a couple of use cases. All right, so what are we going to talk about? We're going to go through 4 stages. We're going to hit on problems. We're going to hit on the C Prime toolbox, which is a lot of what Justin talked about. And then we're going to do 2 use cases, Jira from front to back, and then lean knowledge work. So let's dive in. Let's start with some of the problems, and Justin touched on these, right? So the first thing I'll do is Frankenstein, right? So I built a person, and this is awesome, right? Look what it can do. It's so cool. I pieced all these things together, right? Oh, no, not really. It's good in the beginning, but Justin alluded to there's going to be a lot of problems that are going to surface as you go down this path. And the way that you'll kind of know, in my experience, that you're having these problems is when this question comes up, right? So time to upgrade. And if you're facing this question and it gives you nightmares, then you're experiencing what we're talking about. So now here's a little known fact that most people don't know. Batman, this guy, I think most people know Batman. People don't know that he uses Jira for his crime fighting operations, right? And I know this because I met him at the Atlassian Summit last year, which is coming up again this year in a couple of weeks. So if you're on the fence, I definitely suggest going to it, right? So I was there, and I'm talking to Batman, and he says to me, Ethan, Jira makes me sad. I said, Batman, why does Jira make you sad? I love it. And he says, well, when I'm fighting crime, I have this super awesome tool belt, and it lets me do anything I want, right? And that's really part of my power. I said, okay, well, listen, Batman, let me show you some things, right? So I skipped the next presentation, and I sat down, and I showed him what I'm about to show all of you guys. And I'm happy to report that he's now thrilled about this stuff. So pay attention, because you're going to learn what Batman knows. All right, so let's dive into the toolbox. Pretty much everything that I show you in these 2 use cases is powered by PowerScripts and Custom Fields Pro. So we have a 250 user license that's $850 purchase and then $425 a year, so huge value. And then there's one other call out I want to make, which is for Power Actions. This is super cool, Batman approved, and since it's not part of one of the use cases, I just real quick want to show you how this add-on works, right? So here's one of our projects, and we've got this Actions button, and that's only visible when the issue is resolved and the reopen date is set. And what happens on that reopen date is it sends an email to the assignee with a link and a reminder of, hey, you had a reopen date, and come look at this thing. They come here, and there's 3 buttons available to them. First one is Reopen Request, and Justin alluded to this one. It clones, and you can even copy only certain fields. The next one is an Ignore button, which will clear the reopen date, and even pops up a little warning. And then the last one is New Reminder. And that'll pop up a date and just says, hey, okay, listen, you're not ready to deal with it. Give us a new date, and we'll remind you on that date, right? So that's super powerful, and you're kind of turning Jira into a little bit more of a custom application. All right, so let's dive into the first use case. So Jira from front to back. So this is the story of automating freight rate collection process at our company. And I'm going to take you through the stages that we've gone through and we're going through, where initially we start with Jira running the whole thing, and then over time we start to fade it to the back where it's just really managing the workflow behind the scenes. Let me show you how that plays out at our company. We've got a support services team, right? Support services team needs a freight rate, those big ships that come in over the ocean. So they were initially sending an email to our logistics team, and then our logistics operator would take that information and usually reassemble it and then email it out to a whole bunch of vendors, sometimes 20 plus vendors, right? And they're not done at that stage, right? So they have more responsibilities. They still have to follow up on all these emails. So if the vendors don't reply, they need to say, hey, I'm still waiting on you. or at least they're supposed to do that. They have to do data entry. Every time they get a response back, they have to take that rate and put it into our database. And then later on, they have to aggregate all those rates for that internal initial request, and they have to analyze the rates they got back, and they have to respond to support services and give them their recommendation. So that's the process in a nutshell. It looks really clean on this slide, but when you're doing that multiple times a day for multiple requests, the number of emails keeps multiplying, and this is what it really feels like, right? You've got huge email overload. So we said, all right, we're going to take this process, we're going to take it out of email, and we're going to put it into Jira as a first stage. So what does that look like? This is the Jira project, logistics, right? This is the create issue screen, and I'll walk you through just answering part of it, not all of it, but we can choose an origin type, and when I select overseas port, what will happen is it'll show a new field. So now it displays origin overseas port, right? So we've got a live dynamic form. When I click on origin overseas port, it gives me a bunch of options, right? So there's an autocomplete option, and this is powered from an external source. And you can see you have to scroll down a little bit. There's a lot of info that you have to fill in, right? But what's happening in this on this screen? There's a bunch of things going on. So the first thing is SQL queries. So this first one is powered by an SQL query going out to a custom application that we built and returning results. The next thing it's doing, it's making API calls. It's making API calls out to our Confluence instance, and it's returning a list of potential spaces, which is our product categories. There's a due date field in here, and that due date says, hey, listen, I don't care how many responses you've gotten. I need a response back 5 days from now or 2 weeks from now, and regardless, just trigger the transition, right? So later on down the road, there's a SIL script that will just say, hey, you know, you have to move this over and you got to analyze this. And that's powered by the SIL scheduler. And then you've got required fields based on selection. So Jira has the concept of a required field, right? But if I make a field required on this screen, and you'll see that there's the little red asterisk here, that means you have to fill it out no matter what. But for this use case, we had to say, hey, based on different selections that have already been made, there's going to be different fields that are required. So sometimes this field will be required and sometimes it won't be. And we're able to accomplish that by using the built-in validator function in Jira, but having it run a custom SIL script. That's what you see here. And then, of course, the dynamic fields, and that's what I showed you where we're displaying different questions based on what's been answered. And again, that's done from the live fields section. All right, so that's cool. A couple of the add-ons as we went down, one thing I should mention is as we started proof of concept on this, we did go out to the marketplace and found all of these one-off solutions, right? And that's okay, but we knew there would come a time where we would need that comprehensive solution that Justin referenced. And so over time, as we proved this concept, we said, okay, it's time to go find that solution and replace these things. So in this case, we replaced dynamic forms and env, both great single-use add-ons, but we could easily replicate that functionality with SIL and PowerScripts. So let's take a look at our logistics board, right? So now that we've created these issues, let's take a look at it, right? So here's the one that I created, and you'll notice a couple of things going on. The first thing is we have a summary renamer, because people typically just name their issues whatever they want. It becomes very confusing when you look at those. So we said, hey, we're going to standardize our naming convention. Based on the answers they gave us, we'll come up with a better summary. So we do that. And then the other thing we have is intelligent routing. So this issue is not assigned to anybody by default, and that's because the system's smart. It knows that I'm a developer. I'm not a live production person making real requests, so it doesn't assign it to anybody. However, if a real user was to create this, it's going to do some more intelligent routing, and it's going to say, hey, based on what you're asking for, I know that this person handles it, and it'll automatically assign it to that person. All right. So now let's look at what happens. Logistics picks this up, right? And they make the first transition. They bring it over to gathering prices. At that stage, they're going to see a transition screen. So here's their transition screen. What do we notice going on here? There's a few things. The first thing is we're doing another SQL query, but this time we're injecting it with field values, right? There's a whole bunch of questions that were answered, and we can say, hey, this is a certain type of request, and let's populate it with these vendors. And that's coming again from that custom application we built. So you see here there's 4 pages of vendors. There's actually 47 different vendors, and we're limiting that down already to 18. Now, in a future stage, we're not there yet, but we're starting to collect all sorts of data as we get these rates back and they go into our database. In the future, what we'll do is we'll start to do some intelligent sorting. And we'll say, hey, these are our go-to vendors, alternative vendors, and guys that we're investigating for this certain lane. And then the logistics vendor says, okay, who do I want to go out to, right? So they have all sorts of experience, and they say, I'm going to go out to these 6 or 7 vendors, and they click those checkboxes, and they click submit, and that finishes the transition. So now let's take a look at what it looks like next. All right, so we've got a bunch of issues that have been moved from quote needed over to gathering prices. If we take a look at that, we'll see some things going on here. So the first thing is, like I said, it creates a subtask for each checkbox. So this has a whole bunch of subtasks, one for each vendor. It's copied over all the relevant info, so that subtask is aware of all the questions that were answered in the initial form. It sets this number of vendor fields, so we can see, okay, there were 4 vendors, and then as responses come into the portal, it starts updating the context around that. So this one has 4 vendors went out to, 1 quoted. Looks like the other 3, really, it should say 3, were not able to quote. And then after the transition it's made, it's doing an API push out to the portal. So for each of those subtasks, it's saying, hey, I need a portal page where they can give us their responses. And we'll see that later. The last thing it's doing is it's sending each of those vendors a custom email. And that's being done with a post function. So it's a post function that's all of those things are being done with one post function calling a single SIL program. All right, so what does that email look like? With practically no effort, all the logistics person has done is selected some vendors, clicked some checkboxes, and each of those vendors gets an email that looks like this, right? So there's already a nice pickup in time savings and consistency. All right, so what did we replace for this? In the beginning, we were using, and I love Bob Swift and all of his add-ons, but we were using update on transition and create on transition to do a lot of that stuff. And we went ahead and rewrote those with some pretty simple SIL scripts. And then what we could replace email this issue, which is that the template that does the nice formatting, and PowerScripts can do that as well. However, we haven't done that yet for some reasons that I won't go into here, but I do really like Jetty, as this is called. And so we use PowerScripts in some instances to write some of the new emails, but we had so many existing templates built in Jetty that we're still using that. All right, so this is really a multi-phase project, this logistics project. So the first phase was collecting the emails and automating the reminders. And we did that without any sort of magic portal that I'm about to show you, is simply by fill out the form, automate the subtask creation, automate these emails that look like this going out to the vendors, and automate the reminders. If there's no replies from the vendor in 3 days, send them a reminder. We're still waiting on you for this, right? Phase 2 was portal for data entry, and that's what we're going to take a look at next. So you see this vendor portal URL, and we started telling our vendors, hey, please don't reply to the email, just click the link, it'll launch a website, and you can give us your answers there. And in the future, we talked about this, automating the vendor selection. So I showed you earlier how we can start to categorize the vendors and sort of take some of that, that knowledge, that expertise, and prompt somebody like, hey, these are the people you should be looking at. But down the road, we can, as we have enough data, we can even automate that vendor selection process. We say, hey, the system already knows who's good at this lane and who's not. So let's click the link to the vendor portal URL, and let's see what comes up. So this is the vendor portal that we built. So this is custom web app. And you see up here, we've basically displayed all of the request info to the vendors. Again, same info that was in the email. And then down here, they have the ability to add quote. So they click the button, they fill in the price and the weight and a few other things, and off they go. So as soon as they do that, what's happening? A couple things are happening. It's reaching back out to Jira, and it's triggering a transition in the workflow. and it's also adding whatever comments they put in the portal as comments to the issue. All right, so let's fast forward a week or two, right? All this process has been going on. The emails have gone out. The reminders are going out. The vendors are logging into the portal, and they are giving us their rates. Those are being entered into a database. This is all great. But now that due date hits, or we've gotten enough responses, and somebody in logistics needs to look at all that, all those emails that were used to fly around. So this is from the logistics operator's viewpoint. They log into the portal, and again, they see all the request info neatly displayed at the top, including all the vendors that we're gone out to. And then down below, we're showing all the responses we got. Now, this was a 3-lane request. There was from one origin to 3 destinations, and we received back 14 rates. So I'm displaying one of the lanes and 4 of those rates. And this is where we get into a lot of value. What used to happen is the logistics operator would look at everything and say, you know what, I think it's $3,300 is what you should use, and they would just tell that to the person in support services, and they'd run with that number. And all that expertise onto why they went with that vendor and why they thought that was the price to use, because you don't always use the lowest price, is kind of lost, right? It's maintained inside of that individual. So we wanted a system that starts to capture that tacit knowledge and to codify it. And that's what these buttons are. So they can say, is this a viable rate? Yes, no. And we're basically capturing all the little bits of that analysis. And when they're done with this screen, they just click the button, save analysis to Jira. It transitions the workflow, takes care of automating the initial requester. Hey, your info's ready. Here it is. All that stuff happens. They don't have to think about it. So essentially what's happening is in the beginning, the logistics person is living inside of Jira, and our vendors are living inside of this web portal, and they don't even know that they're interacting with Jira, right? Okay.
Quick question, Ethan.
So is it, yeah.
So to go back to the previous slide, so when you're integrating with Jira here, are you using Jira's native API, or are you using the PowerScript's SillScript API?
Yeah, so really for these things, going back into Jira, it's native just Jira API. Because all we're doing is we're saying, hey, I'm aware, you see up here the internal RFQ has an LOG 2800. So that's log 2800, that's our issue number. And we're essentially just saying, hey, click the button, it's going to Jira using the standard API and saying, hey, transition this issue to the next phase and add whatever info as a comment. So it's on the going out that when we're pushing stuff from Jira to the portal, we're using PowerScripts to enable that. But when we're coming back the other way, we can really just use the default Jira API.
Got it. Thank you.
Cool. All right. So a few more things that we ended up replacing: the automation add-on, which allows you to schedule things, and then miscellaneous workflows and the Jira workflow toolbox, which just do a whole lot of post functions and conditions and validators that we looked at. That's it in a nutshell. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So next one, lean knowledge work. Now I'm also the director of supply chain for the largest company in the group, right? And that is a little over $500 million in sales that we have. Over 3,000 items distributed from over 10 warehouses. And then I've got 10 buyers on my team and 2 demand planners, right? So it's a lot of stuff that I'm responsible for. And there's a lot of problems that go along with that. When I got here, it's been about a year now. So first problem, I can't tell if the problems are known. So I can scan this world of things, which I'll show you momentarily, but I didn't know. Do people know about this? Do they not know about this? Do they think it's a problem? I can't see how quickly they're addressed. You know, or has it been here? Did they pick it up right away? Did it sit for a month? I have no idea. I can't easily view the actions, right? So I can't tell if they are acting on it. What are they doing? Do I even agree with how they're trying to fix it? I can't measure any progress. I can't tell if we're getting better or worse. And then I have a very inefficient review process because I have to pull each person into my office and carve out an hour or 2 of time and just go over their entire category and just pester them with questions, right? Which is frustrating for both them and myself. All right, so those are the problems. That's what we're trying to fix. And again, we're going to turn to Jira. This is our MRP, stands for Materials Requirements Planning. It's an over 10,000 rows Excel sheet, and it's essentially a whole ton of data. And you see all these colors in here. They're essentially flags. You know, you got a problem now, you'll have a problem soon, you should be aware of this or that. And it's just overwhelming amount of data, right? So I said, all right, want to start capturing all of the work that we're doing around this data in Jira. And so that's where we created our supply chain project. I'm looking at the dashboard now, and you can see the different issue types on the left. So there's all sorts of typical supply chain problems. You get heavy on stuff. You got too much inventory. Stuff is out of date. You're going to be out of stock soon. Things are going to start expiring. You are out of stock. You've got this really difficult item for whatever reason. You need a forecast update. You need to change status of something. Something shipped late. There's all sorts of problems, and we just created an issue type for each of them. So right now, there's actually 354 open issues, and total issues that we've created to date, so close to 4,000. We started this project back in November 2016. At the time, it was just fired up a project. It was really loose, and we started manually creating issues. In February, we started looking to PowerScripts to automate that process. So I'm going to talk to you about a couple of the issue types that are automated. So that would be expired and out of stock, right? So let me start with the overview. Let's look at our dashboard. So this is one of the big things I look at all the time. How many out of stocks are we creating? Is the system creating month by month? You can see actually we're making great progress, right? And then same thing for expired. Some really good downward trends, and perhaps we're reaching the bottom of it because I'm starting to potentially level out. So that's the two issues we're talking about. Let's look at one of these issues. So this is an expired lot issue, right? So the system created this automatically. There's a lot of info on here, but let's look at the different types of info. So the first thing we have is we've got static data. It created this, it pulled some generic information. What's the product code number? What do we call this thing? What region is it in? And how many of that item went on hold? 2,500. Next thing we have is the players in this. So again, it says it's creating it, it's scanning our ERP database, and it's saying, okay, who's involved in this item? And it automatically pulls those people in and sets them there. Then we've got dynamic data. So this is the data that we can watch day by day to see how this issue is progressing. It updates on, I think, an hourly schedule. So if we move some of this out, it'll drop the quantity on hold. It'll change the value. Every day it changes the number of days until it expires. And then we have management context, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but as we're resolving these things, we're asking people, okay, tell us why this was created. What happened here? And then finally, this is PowerScripts, right? So the reporter is RoboCam. So anytime you see that, that just means, okay, system generated this issue. And then the last thing I'll call out here is issue type specific validator. So we have a custom workflow that's applied to every one of these issue types, and we've got, I think, like 10 different issue types, all using the same workflow. Now you can have a validator. For those who don't know what a validator is, it says, hey, you're not allowed to do this action unless this thing exists. And in this case, we say, hey, you can't move this to done unless quantity on hold is 0. That's because it's expired product. You got to do something with it. You got to sell it out if you still can, or you got to dump it, whatever you got to do. And so we want that validator, but only for expired product, because that doesn't hold true for the other issue types. And again, that's where SIL and the PowerScripts comes in. Without it, I would have to create a different workflow. It'd be an exact copy of the other workflow, but it would be tied just to the expired issue, which would mean now I would have potentially 10 different workflows, all having the same workflow with just, hey, I just wanted this one validator. So that's the power of how when you grow to scale, you're going to want these scripts so that Jira doesn't become unmanageable the way it is natively. All right, so let's look at another use case for this. This is one of the existing reports for lots on hold. This is an 8-page report. It's got a whole bunch of good data on here, but it's not really actionable. So when I look at this report, again, same problem with the MRP. Who's doing what? Who's working on this? Who's not working on it? All these questions. When did it start? And I don't have access to that. But once we had Jira and PowerScripts automatically opening things, okay, now I have all that data flowing into Jira. I don't need to use this report. I can write my report directly out of Jira. And this is essentially the same report. The difference is we've got data on the left, right? So here's all those hard-coded, all that information, but now I've got all my context on the right. So I can sort by last comment date, start to say, hey, what's been sitting the longest and what is the last action, and easily read that with that last comment with author. And now I'm able to kick the ball forward only where I can see that attention has dropped off and I don't bug people on things as long as they're moving forward, which is good for both them and for me. What do we replace here? We replace CCC last comment just to create that simple last comment field. We had an add-on just for that. Now we have that happening with a simple SIL script. So let's go back to the MRP, right? Same thing we looked at before, but there's one big difference here. And again, that's context. You look over at the right, we were able to add a new column called Jira. And if there's Jira issues, there's a plus sign there. I click the plus sign, and boom, it gives me a report of here's all of the Jira issues that have been created. I can see the last comment, and I can click the link if I want to get the full story on any of them, right? So this is huge. I can now sit, I don't have to pull people aside, carve out hour chunks of my day to sit with them, ask them questions I've already asked them and forgotten, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so you can't manage what you can't measure. Peter Drucker. So hopefully some of you guys know this guy. He's a great efficiency author, and this is very true, right? You have to be able to measure things. We looked at this out of stocks graph. So this is picture perfect, month after month, less and less and less and less, right? And to do that, you have to be able to measure where are you at and where are you going so that you can ask questions. You know, why did this happen? Now, when I first got here and I started asking people, why do we have out of stocks, right? The answer I would get is, oh, you know, this person this person that. Everyone points their fingers and says it's their fault, right? We did a pretty simple thing. We said, hey, when you're closing this issue out, answer these two questions. So this is a transition screen again, and they have to give us an answer and say, what's the root cause? And then give us an explanation if you want to in the field below. So now there's no excuses. I can write a report on that, and this is another thing that I look at regularly, and I can see what's causing our issues. Now, at the end of the day, those stories where we were pointing the finger at other people, only 61 of our issues were customer communication or the vendor sending us product without enough shelf life. The other 334, we point the finger at ourselves and we say, these are ones that we determined we can do something about, right? And that's huge because now you're making data-driven decisions rather than relying on people and their stories. All right, so in summary, everything you just saw, PowerScripts and KCF Pro, I think I said earlier, $850 initial, $425 yearly recurring is a huge value. We replaced nine different add-ons, which cost $7,000 initial and had a $3,500 yearly recurring fee, which is nice. Listen, the money's great and that's good, but really the win there is that we're not managing all the interactions and all the complexities and all the upgrade problems. Everything's runs smoother, upgrades aren't a problem, and all around it's just less of a hassle, which is great. So that's it. Thank you. My name's Ethan. If you go down this path and you start doing really cool stuff, find me on LinkedIn. Always happy to hear stories and see what you guys are doing. That's it. Thanks.
Ethan, thanks a lot. We've got a couple of questions coming in. Before we go to those, I just want to highlight something I think is kind of unique about what you've done with PowerScripts. And you've used some scripting wizardry to really focus on some adoption issues. And, for example, your list of 47 vendors that got reduced down to 18. I'm sure that if it was all 47 that people had to choose, if you looked at it, they'd probably choose, ones from the top 10 every time, just because, hey, I'm not going to scroll through the entire list every single time, and there'd be vendors that you missed. So I think that's a really kind of a unique business opportunity.
Yeah, that's perfect. In fact, the way that played out was they had a mailing list, and they just always hit every single vendor because they were unable to get their heads around it. And the vendors would come back and say, hey, I've already told you I can't do this lane. Why do you keep asking me? And it was because I'm overwhelmed. I don't know what to do other than have a mailing list. You're in it. You want to get it. You get everything. It's a good catch.
Yeah, and I also like how you use PowerScripts to make, I can't remember what the field was. I think it was on hold quantity, a required field based on a particular value. We know that required fields it's always a balance, right? If you make too many things required, people will just stop using the system and go around it. If you don't make them required, then you don't actually get the data that you need to make those decisions. So again, you kind of you really kind of hit the nail on the head there by only making it required if a certain condition exists. And that, I would assume, that's helped you get better data and also maintain good adoption of the system.
You're right, it's user adoption. The users get pissed if the users entering it get pissed if they have to fill out fields that aren't relevant, and they get upset and they put junk data in there. And then on the flip side, if you make it not required, then the users receiving that info get pissed because they say, hey, they don't fill out these fields and I need these fields. So you got to find that perfect balance of these are required in these instances and put the minimal amount of burden on somebody that you can.
Hey, Ethan, before we jump into a couple questions, could you just pass presenter rights back over to Justin, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. All you, Justin.
Real quick, Ethan, which feature of PowerScript do you think you use the most? Is it workflow transitions? Is it event listeners? Which solution do you use the most for the use cases that you just demonstrated? Probably the SQL integration is probably a big one, huh?
We use probably the scheduler and post functions. So post functions is one of the most powerful things, and I think the first thing to get into when you start customizing is, hey, you know that post functions, for those who don't know, they're attached to a transition, right? So if a transition is being made, it means that there's a user doing something with that issue. So there's an action being taken, and usually there's all sorts of things you can automate around that action. It's if this, then that. So if this is happening, do that. And so that's the post function. So it's super easy to write a SIL script post function and just say, hey, since they're moving this, then email this person or update this field or close this issue in this other project, things of that nature.
We've got a question about how you manage your SIL scripts. Do you manage them within the scripting interface, or do you use an outside revision control system?
Yeah, that's a great question. We manage it inside. Part of that is due to the guy who does a lot of this work for us is very, very, very organized and laid it out well from the start. But I have talked about, I don't think there's version control built into this, and we have talked about going down the path of putting this stuff into Bitbucket and Bamboo and pushing it through the whole process so that there is version control. You do have to be careful with what you're doing and how you're organizing stuff.
Hey, Justin, we've got a question for you about how folks can learn about kind of the basic building blocks of PowerScripts, and if there's any place to go to see some examples on how those are, kind of best practices on how to use those.
Sure. So if you go to Google and type in PowerScripts for Jira, you can find a wealth of information. But for the beginning user, I would say that there's kind of a three-step process, and all of this is available in our Confluence public documentation. There are three spaces. We're looking at cleaning up our documentation to make it so that it flows a little bit better. But as a new user, I would say that the three public spaces we have available, I would start with simple issue language. You want to understand how the syntax works, how to write a for loop. Like I said, it's as simple as pseudocode, but at the same time, you want to know what simple issue language is capable of and how to write that syntax. So I would start with simple issue language. Then I would move on to tutorials and recipes. That's another public Confluence space we have open. It shows you example scripts of what's possible with PowerScripts, and you can tweak them to taste for your own installation. And the third and final one is our actual PowerScripts documentation, and I would save that for last because You want to know how to write the script. You want to know what's possible with the scripts, and then you want to see how it can be executed. So our PowerScripts documentation essentially tells you from where you can invoke a script that you've already written. So you have to have that baseline knowledge. I would put those three spaces in that order.
Cool. Thank you. Let's see. We got a question for Ethan. Do you feel left out being the only one that doesn't have a guitar in the background?
We talked about that before, and I said that I could go find my kazoo because that's as far as my musical talents extend. I like to stick to automating work. Let those guys do their jam sessions. And so yes, I'll summarize that by saying yes, I feel left out.
Thank you for the direct answer. Let's see, there's a question here about how much time you feel like you've saved in some of these automations. Have you guys quantified really the impact of PowerScripts yet?
Yeah, it's a great question. We did some initial scoping of how much time went into this process, how much time was spent rearranging data, sending out the emails, doing the data entry. So we quantified number of minutes for each of these tasks and the number of times that they flow through. But there's an interesting aspect to that question. It's a question that comes up a lot. First, let me just say we're now at the stage where we're getting ready to revisit that and see if we're making those savings. But the other thing to consider is what are you now doing that was literally impossible before? And Dan, you kind of asked that question of, well, there's some value that people overlook from the fact that, hey, now we're a great partner because we don't spam our vendors. And so they're more likely to give us good replies when we ask. And it was literally impossible to follow up on these emails. Because there were so many, and so it just wasn't done. So it's tough when you say, yeah, okay, well now we're following up on all these emails, and that saves 2 minutes per follow-up, but like you weren't even going to be able to do that, so people just completely ignored it. So just when you're making those evaluations, you have to make sure that you calculate all those things, and those are very hard calculations. But we're at the stage now where the portal's up, it's being used for a good portion of our business, and we're looking at where are the areas that the portal's not being used, and how can what do we need to do in order to get full usage, and starting to evaluate value. But it's a little early to come back and give you hard data.
Thanks. Hey, Justin, we've got a question if a Bitbucket comment can be used to trigger a PowerScript.
It's possible. I'm not overly familiar with Bitbucket. We don't have a PowerScript solution necessarily as a Bitbucket add-on. But if Bitbucket has the concept of event firing, like if you could fire up, say, like a webhook based on a comment being created within Bitbucket, or a commit being created, I'm sorry. If you can fire a webhook from an event in Bitbucket, you can write a script on Jira side with PowerScripts that would accept that information and then act upon it. Alternatively, you could do things, if that's not an option, you could connect Bitbucket's internal database potentially to PowerScripts and write SQL queries to get information of commits created in the last so many minutes. Then do X. You can also say ping Bitbucket's API for issues that are for repositories that have had commits in the last 30 seconds, and then pull it every 30 seconds and then execute a script that way. So there are a number of ways to do it. I would recommend looking for a Bitbucket native push way first, and then exploring Jira, PowerScripts for Jira pull methods after that using either API or SQL queries.
Cool, thank you. Justin, you mentioned that there's documentation available online about simple issue language, PowerScripts in general, a couple tutorials. Are there any kind of pre-canned scripts out there that folks could install?
Yeah, so PowerScripts does not come with any scripts out of the box. When you open PowerScripts for the first time, it's a blank canvas. Your code editor is going to contain no scripts. the tutorials and recipes, the example scripts that we have in our documentation, some of them would work for any given Jira installation using native fields. Some of the others won't. So a lot of the execution of PowerScripts is instance dependent, which is why we haven't given a host of built-in scripts just yet. It is on our roadmap to create some useful scripts, because clone and link, that's straightforward. Everybody's going to use that. We should include that out of the box. So yeah.
I would just jump in too and say that what I've always found with stuff like this is I tend to reuse concepts. So there's certain concepts that we script that I find many applications for. And so probably I would suggest that if people are serious, get some of the time from you guys, have you help them write the first scripts, and then, listen, you can keep working with them, or they can just start to adapt them, because at that point, okay, they wrote the base script, and, you're swapping out custom field A for custom field B, or, this thing for that thing, and they can run with it from there.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, we're here to help out for sure. Questions like, how do I write a script that does X, Y, Z that isn't necessarily in our public documentation? The Atlassian community is very powerful. There are many users of PowerScripts, and people are really happy to help, help create those scripts. But at the same time, I believe we have a promotion going where if you purchase PowerScripts, we're going to give you a couple free hours of consultation, and that's actually a really good idea to have somebody who knows, the ins and outs of PowerScripts, how to write SIL, kind of sit down with the user and run them through how to create a couple scripts. And as you said, Ethan, you find different components of different scripts being reused all the time. Like we said, swapping out custom field names, create a subtask is used either in a workflow transition or event listener, all kinds of stuff. So once you have that base body of knowledge, pulling specific components out and applying them in other applications is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that's actually what I did. I mean, when I went to learn PowerScripts, I got an hour of Justin's time. He showed me around a little bit, and my background is not heavy in coding. Educationally, it's statistics. So I did a lot of scripting in Bizarro stats languages, but not a lot in JavaScript. So, but Justin showed me around a little bit, then I went and used the documentation to create all sorts of interesting things, such as we've got a kind of a live quiz for you here, Justin. We've got a question from someone who has asked that they're interested in automating an email notification to a person that is assigned a subtask upon completion of a predecessor subtask using links.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible?
It's possible. And we get a lot of questions like this. Is ABC or XYZ possible? And my canned response is always yes, with an asterisk. I haven't found anything yet where I've been stuck. Every question someone asks me and says, can you proliferate dozens of subtasks and base the summaries on the versions of its parents, and also close the cloned issue of the subtask? It's just these wild use cases. And I always say, I don't know, but let me try. And I haven't gotten stuck yet. So it's powerful stuff.
Justin, to your earlier point about evaluating add-ons and reading the marketplace, one of the reasons I went with PowerScripts was there's a review on there that says PowerScripts doesn't just open doors; it knocks down the friggin' walls, and I love that. That was one of the ones that stuck out at me. And like you said, I've found that to be true. Okay, maybe a little bit harder this one than that one, but everything's very easily done.
And our development team is always looking for new feature requests. So if there's something that PowerScripts does not do that you wish it did, we're very happy and eager to develop a solution for it.
So I know we're at the top of the hour here and just about out of time. There's a handful of questions that have gone unanswered. We'll reply to those after the webinar. I just wanted to go around the room real quick and just see if there's any kind of parting thoughts. Ethan, I'll go to you first.
I got nothing other than to say it was a pleasure speaking, and I guess I do have something then. And just invite everybody who's thinking about it to go ahead and test the waters. I think that's awesome, the promo you guys are doing of the initial couple of hours of consulting. Just come prepared for that. Have a couple of use cases, have your test environment spun up and know what you want to accomplish. Try and throw a curveball at them and have them help you through some business use cases. I mean, at the end of the day, it takes almost nothing to pay back the value of what these add-ons cost. Like I said, I'm at $425 a year now because I've already purchased them. It's like literally a drop in the bucket. So take advantage of it.
Thanks. What about you, Justin?
Ditto. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching. If you do decide to evaluate PowerScripts, if you're not already a user, please keep in mind the best practices for evaluating and purchasing add-ons, as Ethan mentioned. Again, thanks for watching. We hope you find value in PowerScripts. We think it's one of the most valuable add-ons in the marketplace. Of course, we are justified in saying that. And yeah, so thanks again for joining us. If you need help with PowerScripts, the Lasting community, we have a support portal. Email products@cprime.com, marketing@cprime.com. Lots of documentation online. If you get stuck, there are many avenues to get help. So thanks again for joining us.
Thank you both. Thanks for all who attended, and Patricia for getting us started. Ethan, thank you so much for your input, wisdom, and we'll get you a guitar for the next time, so you have in the background. Justin, thank you as well. And with that, I believe we are signing off.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks.
Have a great day, everyone.